She's got a... Hello? She's got a stack of books and a mini microphone. She must mean business. Welcome to the first reading wrap-up of the month, a monthly wrap-up for 2025. Here are all the books I read in January. For each of these books, I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, what I liked, what I didn't like, if I would reread it, and my overall feeling about them. And maybe I'll tell you how I read it. Like audiobook, ebook, physical copy. So the first book I finished was The Favorites by Lane Fargo. I read this on audio. Thank you so much, Libro FM, putting this in your ALC program. I loved this. In my notes, I wrote 4.5/5 stars. I kind of landed somewhere in there, and I still stand by that. It was a fabulous read. This book follows an ice dancing duo, their very high highs and their lowest of lows. It is told through the perspective of Kat, who is the female in this duo, and she knows that a documentary about the worst day of her life is coming out, and she wants to tell her story. And so we get parts of that documentary in interview formats, which was done so well as her telling us the story of her life leading up to the worst day of her life. I liked so much about this book. It had so much tension. It honestly felt like I was listening to a documentary most of the time. I felt like the pacing was done very, very well. I honestly wanted to binge it and just keep reading it. However, when I had to pause and not listen to it because life and responsibilities, I wasn't left like, oh no, I've like broken my pacing. It was very easy to sort of drop back into it. I also found that it had some really great peaks and valleys, and in those valleys it was really easy to go, okay, pause. This is a great pausing point. Much of what I didn't like about it has to do specifically with the character Heath. Oh, also this is inspired, I don't think it's loosely adapted. It's like an adaptation of Wuthering Heights, but I've never read Wuthering Heights, so I have nothing to say about that aspect of it. You're gonna have to go find that somewhere else. I know literally nothing about it. What I have to say about what I didn't like about it is going to contain some spoilers. There's just no two ways around it. If I'm gonna talk about it, I have to talk about it. Know that coming into this part. Even though Kat is telling this story, Heath is so important. He is the mirror to her. And at times it felt like we were missing a lot because we weren't getting anything from his POV. And when he would speak, he honestly didn't come off as having much of a personality anyway. I really toy with whether this would have been stronger had it been dual POV or had we gotten interviews in Heath's POV. The entire book, because Heath doesn't have a POV and he's not in the interviews, you spend it being like, okay, we can see what's coming down the road, and then it doesn't come. That kind of leaves the ending just a little bit like it just simmers off. Just filmed my favorites video and I talked about it. It feels like she just gave like a little tap and then pulled the punch back. There's no, it's not like a gut punch. It doesn't follow through with the punch. It just goes, It certainly didn't ruin the experience for me, right? Because I'm looking at the note I made right when I finished the book. It was 4.55 stars. I still absolutely loved it. And that really is the biggest part of it that I didn't like. I just wanted more from Heath. I wanted him to have a personality, even when he was speaking in the narration that Kat was giving. He just came off as faceless man who is emotionally stunted. Like, that's it. And I feel like there's more to him than that based on how Kat feels about him. So the dynamics felt off. Would I read it again? Hell yes, I would. It was wonderful. I had a great time. I would read it 10 more times. I liked it so much. Then we come to a little cozy fantasy. This is Emily Wilde Encyclopedia of Fairies. I talked about this in my reading vlog, so if you want some more like reaction-y kind of stuff, you'll get that there. This is about a professor who goes to a small town because she is finishing up her Encyclopedia of Fairies, and this is the last group that hasn't really been documented. And it's all about the relationships she forms with these town folk, the fae that she encounters, and a professor colleague of hers that comes and bothers her. This book was fine. It was just fine. It was a little too cozy at times for me. Like, the pacing was kind of off. When it was in the like we're just kind of plodding along phase, it very much felt like plodding along. And I was like, okay, what's going to happen? What's going on? And I think part of that had to do with it feeling like we are reading her encyclopedia or her diary. But then we'd get to these really awesome action sequences, and I felt like those read so well. So I just think the pacing was off for me. It was very sweet. It was very cozy. But especially for how cozy it was and how dark it gets, I was like, okay, we need to balance this a little bit more. I wouldn't read it again, and I'm not planning on continuing in the series, but I'm not mad I read it. I did DNF one book this month. I'm going to pull up my notes here. So I said, so this is So Let Them Burn by Camilla Cole. I've had a lot of people tell me about this book, so I was like, let's give it a go. The second one came out, I think, earlier this month. And for me, I said there was so much backstory being dropped in the first two chapters. It was hard to wrap my mind around the present and the past, and I needed the story to move forward faster to get me engaged. It was also a YA fantasy, which is something I'm very wary of going into because I read so much adult fantasy. It's not that I don't enjoy YA fantasy anymore. I'm just very picky about the storytelling, and what I find engaging literally just comes down to that. I sometimes find it hard to content about things that I don't like because I never want people to think that I like hated it just to hate it. Like, there's always a reason, and sometimes that reason isn't what you want to hear. It's just that we didn't vibe. Truly, it just comes down to that. I just wasn't vibing with it, and I ended up reading so many more books this month that I really enjoyed. So I'm glad I didn't keep reading it, because I don't know that I would have ended up liking it, and then I would have felt resentful because I wasted my time and blah, 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 blah. That being said, I have a ton of mutuals that love this book, so clearly there's an audience out there for it. It's just not me, and that's okay. Because then I read a delightful fantasy romance, Paladin's Faith by T. Kingfisher. Fourth? I have to think about this. Grace, Hope, Strength, Faith. Yeah, fourth book. The Saint of Steel series by T. Kingfisher, and I loved it. It was phenomenal. This series is part of a larger world that T. Kingfisher has built. If you want to read it in order, it starts with The Clockwork Boys, which is 2 books. Then there's a standalone, The Saint of Steel, and then we come into, not true, the standalone is Sword Heart, sorry. Then we come into the Saint of Steel series. Now, I read it totally backwards. I read the first 2 Saint of Steel books, then I read Sword Heart, then I read Clockwork Boys. I think then I wrapped my way back to Sword Heart because I love that book so much. And then I started the Saint of Steel series over again. These books exist within this bigger world, and then the lore of this series is that there are these paladins, and they are pledged to the Saint of Steel. And you find out, they talk about it in all of the books, so I think whichever one you decide to start with, whether you start with one, I would recommend starting with one, just because there are things that happen in each of the books that'll make more sense. First book, we find out that the Saint of Steel died a couple years prior to us meeting these paladins in book 1, and the paladins went into a like fugue killing state. They totally lost their minds, and it ended up breaking them in their soul because their saint was a good one. He would come over them in the battle tide, and they would know exactly who to take down. Suddenly, they lost all control of knowing who they were meant to be fighting, and it damaged their souls. They ended up getting taken in by the Temple of the White Rat, and this order kind of allowed them to rehabilitate themselves. They are bodyguards for the lawyers. The White Rat are lawyers. They are bodyguards for their lawyers. They sort of help out around the temples, and they can get sort of like sent out for various tasks, if you will. But it's really given them a place where they can rehabilitate themselves. And so in the 4th book, we are with we're actually with 2 of the paladins, and we are with this woman named Marguerite, who up until this point we had presumed was dead from previous events in a prior book. And she is coming to the bishop of the Temple of the White Rat because she needs paladins to accompany her. She is a spy, and she has some really important information that is going to change the economy of the land that they live in. And the people that she is actively working for do not want that information getting out. So they are trying to take her down. And so she needs to go on this mission at court and get a little bit more information, but she needs some bodyguards to do that. She also needs specifically one bodyguard, and then the other paladin she needs to pretend and make up a courtly status for. So we have this plot of the book, and it's a political intrigue, an adventure, and a quest, and a romance. And it's so wonderful. Oh, I truly have nothing bad to say about it. There's not a single bad thing I have to say about it. This was 5 stars, hands down. I absolutely loved it. Love T. Kingfisher's banter. I love her relationship building. I love coming back to this series because in each book, every character is well-rounded. It doesn't feel like we're only focusing on the couple and like 2 or 3 people that interact with them. We already knew these paladins coming in, and then we got to know them better. We had already known Marguerite coming into this book, and we got to know her better. And she's not afraid to expand on her world. So we've spent the other books kind of a different plot, and now we're going on something else, and it opens up the world even more by the end. It's so juicy. And I love when a book can just make me like blush and giddy, and like I can see when I talk about it, my face lights up, and I'm just like, it's everything. There's comedy, there's drama, there's sword fights and banter and yearning. So much yearning. Oh my god. If you're one of those people that's like, I need the yearning back in romance, this book. This one. Most of them, actually. I would say all of the books in the Saint of Steel series have a solid amount of yearning because the paladins are so emotionally wounded. And it's great. It makes for great content. All the stars, every star in the sky goes to this one. I went straight from a make me like kick my feet and giggle book into a dark romance. If you don't want to hear me talk about this because we know each other personally, I get it. This is Lights Out by Navessa Allen. I read the audiobook of it. This is done by Zando, and Zando's audiobooks are fabulous. I really have liked all the Zando audiobooks that I've listened to, so whoever's working over there, keep up the good work. So the tagline on this is, the couple who slays together stays together. So we kind of get the idea that it's going to be a little murdery and a little bit dark, and then you read the content warnings. Lights Out is a dark stalker rom-com with heavy themes, and you can go look up the trigger warnings for yourself. I love that their audiobooks always contain the trigger warnings. So again, going into it, you kind of get the idea. I liked the storytelling, and I liked Navessa Allen's voice as an author, and I really liked the rom-com vibe with the dark. Like, the balance was good. The balance in that regard, like, it was funny, but it was also really dark, and she balanced it. She balanced it really, really well. Not everybody can. Even rom-coms get it wrong. Like, rom-coms that aren't dark get it wrong. It really fell apart for me in the storyline and in the pacing. It felt like we didn't have enough time to build up their relationship, and then there is this incident and a murder. I mean, hello, the couple who slays together stays together. It's like Romeo and Juliet. They tell you what's coming in the beginning. And then we spend the rest of the book in this post-murder, but it never feels like it can really get its legs under it. And so I found myself the entire book being entertained because it's comedic, but by the end I was just kind of like, what happened? What was the story? What did they tell me? And I don't love feeling that way at the end. So overall, it was just kind of weird for it to feel like a palate cleanser because it's a dark romance, but it was really funny. I'm back with an outfit change. My phone ran out of storage, and then the clip that I filmed to explain what was happening, my mic died, so there was no sound. Here we are several days later to finish this video because I'm not going to go back and re-record 25 minutes of footage. Jumping right in, the next book we're going to talk about is The Sword of Kaigen by M.L. Wong. This is an indie published big epic war fantasy, and it was delicious. I really enjoy when I read a big fantasy book and it just makes me want to sit with it for a couple of hours. In this book, we follow Misaki and Mamoru. They are mother and son, and they live in this village in a place called Kaigen. And the most notable thing about them is the family that Misaki married into and Mamoru is from. They are really seen as like these guardians of this place. This village in particular is a protector of the empire. They are the last place that can defend the empire from an assault. So all of the men in this village are bred to fight. And their family specifically are really seen as like the generals and the like head of this army. And it all traces back to an ancestor of theirs who wielded this magical blade. It's called the Whispering Blade, where they take the magical power that they have and they are able to create a sword of ice, but it is essentially impenetrable. So Mamoru is on his way to wielding a whispering blade, and he is not succeeding, and it's really getting to him. Misaki is really grappling with the fact that in her youth, she was a fighter, and she was well educated, and she wasn't seen as less than because she was a woman, and she is married into a family, particularly, but a village where the women are seen as reproducers. So we've got the backdrop of this family legacy, all of these societal feelings that really have shaped Misaki and Mamoru into the people that they are when we meet them in the book, on top of this big political theme that really takes hold, where this town has really been isolated by the empire so that they can be used for the empire's gains. The storytelling utilized in this book also really makes it quite unique. I have never really read another book like it, where there are really two climaxes in the book. Peak of the story is not the battle that is fought, it is one of the peaks in the story. And I don't think that's a spoiler, right? When you walk into a war fantasy, like you are ready for a battle and you're kind of waiting to see how that comes to be. Like that is the chase. So it was really exciting to know that like there's a little bit more to this than that. The thing I liked the most in this book was 100% the action sequences. There's a really incredible one. It is one of the best action sequences I've read in fantasy. It is a solid like 80 to 100 pages, which feels like such a feat. Like my attention was captured. I was enamored. I felt like I was there. It felt like a movie was playing behind my eyes. And I was like flipping pages so quickly. And that part of the story comes after kind of feeling like I was slogging through the book a little bit, which is where I get a little torn because I really don't mind when it takes me 100 to 200 pages to get into an epic fantasy. There's a lot to build up. I do wish there'd been a little bit more for me to grasp onto so that I wasn't like so whiplashed when we get to this part after the first 200 pages. Where it lost me several times is some of the chapters are long. Some of the chapters are up to 40 pages and I am just not a long chapter girl. I need breaks. I like when there is diversity in chapter lengths. I just find it hard to stay engaged, especially when it's a lot of information in those chapters as opposed to like big sweeping sequences. So that's kind of where it lost me a little bit. But it still managed to keep my attention, so it's not really that big a deal in the grand scheme of things. And this is where I kind of grapple with like, okay, how do I really feel? Because I really loved it, but some of the execution, I was like, okay, can we move on with things, please? I absolutely would read it again. I might even read it in parts. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily the kind of book where I would go back and read the entire thing beginning to end, but I would go back to sort of flesh out some of those larger chapters because I feel like now that I have a grasp on everything, I would get a lot more of the minutia. So I really just want to go back and read the action sequences. It's very emotional. I cried. I was texting Zoran through most of it and I was like, what have you done to me? Because I did read this because of Zoran. I am very excited to see what else ML Wong puts out. I think she has another book out because she just got picked up by Traditional Publishing. So I know all the other books that were kind of tied to the Sword of Kaigen are no longer available, and I'm hoping that those will come back in some capacity. And then I totally changed gears and I went into historical romance with The Gentleman's Gambit by Evie Dunmore. This is the fourth book in the League of Extraordinary Women series, and I am really glad that I finished this series off. So this book follows Katrina and Elias, and their relationship is quite complicated because when they meet, they are in a compromising position. Katrina was taking a little dip in the loch, and Elias was birdwatching and happened to catch her. There were some words that were spoken, maybe a foot went into a mouth, not in a fun way, in a like, oh no, I've said the wrong thing way. Then they both find out that Elias is Katrina's dad's colleague, and then Katrina becomes his escort to London because she can get him access to a collection that he is studying through her father. And once we've got a grasp on that, the real story begins. Because Katrina is really struggling with the idea of love and can she find love? She's had a lot of failed love in her past. And she also doesn't really know where she fits into her society right now. She's a professor, she's trying to write a book, but she's also really on the front lines of fighting for women's rights, and balancing all of those things is turning out to be quite difficult for her. Where Elias has a big secret. And that big secret means he's got to cross Katrina in a way that could damage her professional reputation and her father's. So can they both overcome these things, all while maybe leaning into the fact that they are attracted to each other? Who's to say? I really like Evie's writing. The thing I like the most about this series is the way she's able to balance society and this romance in every single book. As a historian who actually loves historical romances, I am always looking for ones that are able to either balance or sort of tip society on its head so that I'm not faced with a whole bunch of fact checking in the end. That's what Evie does. Like her author notes at the end are so comprehensive, where she talks about the things that inspired her, the things that she personally changed to keep the story moving forward, facilitate her creative vision, while also keeping a lot of truth, especially at this period of time and what these women are fighting for. Like, they are fighting not only for the vote for women's rights, they are fighting so that women are not trapped in marriages that are harmful to them, poking holes in the double standards of like men owning them as property and their property at the same time, which not every author is going to be able to balance those things on top of pretty delicious romances. I will say, out of all the books, this one felt the least like a romance, in that the romance didn't feel like it was driving the story, and it felt a lot more driven by society. When I got to the end, I was really craving more of the romance. Like, I wish they'd romanced each other more throughout the book. We got a big chunk of them being together, which was great, and we got a happily ever after in the end. Spoiler alert, it's a romance, that's what's gonna happen. But out of all the books, I definitely felt like this one left me wanting the most at the end. It's not often that I travel back in time with my reads. I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm pretty much reading books that have been published within the last 5 years. So traveling back to 2012, 2013 was quite a trip. This is Rule by Jay Crownover. I read this because I was invited to a screening of the movie adaptation of this book. And I will say right from the jump, I enjoyed the movie more than the book. And I just think that this is a product of its time, and there's a lot in here that I was like, oh no. So this book is a childhood family friends two lovers. We meet Shaw, who's a pre-med student who was best friends with Rule's twin brother Remy before Remy passed away, and Rule's family does a family brunch every Sunday. So when we meet the two of them, Rule has just had a fun little night with a lady, and Shaw barges into his apartment and is like, get dressed, we need to go to brunch. And he's like, ugh, I hate her, I hate that she does this. You quickly find out that Rule is kind of just like a bad boy, and he's a bad boy in the sense that he likes tattoos and he doesn't really live a socially traditional lifestyle. Does that mean he's an artist? Like, that's really what we can break it down to. He rides a motorcycle, he has a mohawk, he's not tied down to any one girl, and he's also really grappling with the loss of his twin brother, but also some emotional baggage from his childhood. He really just feels like a social outcast, where Shaw is sort of meant to be the opposite of him. She's a pre-med student. She grew up in an affluent family, but she's pretty estranged from them because they rule her life and she doesn't like that. And then we go on this journey of the two of them falling in love, and we find out that Shaw has been in love with Rule for a very long time, and his twin brother kept that secret from their family. That is the basis of it. around them is a lot of other stuff. Shaw's ex-boyfriend is stalking her. Rule's mom is really struggling with the death of her son. And so what we end up getting is a like bridge from YA into adult, because these characters are between the ages of 19 and 22. And it has this like edge of dark romance to it, simply because of the social circles that Rule exists in and some of the subject matter that's in it. I think if I had read this back when it came out, when I was headed into college, I would have loved this. I really would have eaten this up. As somebody who is well out of high school and college, I'm like, there are more red flags in this book than I really care to unpack. But reading this in tandem with seeing the movie, it was really interesting to see what they kept and what they sort of like used the bones for and changed. And I'm actually really excited to see if they continue this movie series, because I think it could be fun, like great addition to the rom-com slash just romance genre in film, something we are seriously lacking in these days. I have to say, I did find myself changing their appearances in my mind. Like, I just could not grapple with the mohawk. I couldn't do it. So in my mind, it was Chase Stokes as Rule. I went totally outside my comfort zone and I read How to Sleep at Night by Elizabeth Harris. This is, and I feel like one of the blurbs really summed up what this book is really well. A timely novel of family, marriage, love, and politics. Like that is it. Gabe is married to Ethan, who is Kate's sister, and Kate was in a relationship with Nicole and they reconnect. And the three of them are sort of brought together through love and politics. I really struggled with this book because I find it difficult to read fiction about reality, especially when our own political reality is quite fraught right now. Where I think this book excels is how it taps into the title, How to Sleep at Night. Because the three characters that we meet are all faced with the question of, how do you sleep at night? Gabe identifies as a Democratic gay man who is married to a Republican and has to grapple with how the public views him. Like, how can he reconcile what his husband is saying on TV and the politics that he's running for? Kate is a journalist, which comes with a lot of fraught emotions. So in that respect, it was good. It's very outside my comfort zone. I very, very rarely read just straight contemporary that doesn't really have romance or a fantasy element to it. This is T. Kingfisher's newest novel, A Sorceress Comes to Call, and it was wonderful. It was moody and fantasy forward with a little bit of horror, and it was funny, and it was so good. This is a dark reimagining of The Goose Girl, which I actually want to kind of piece out in my mind a little bit, because I'm 99% sure that Little Thieves is a retelling of The Goose Girl, and both of these books are so different. Like, the way these authors were able to take that story and spin it in their own ways, I find so fascinating. So stay tuned for that. One of our main characters in this book is Cordelia. She's a young girl living with her mother. When we are introduced to her, she does not have control of her body. And this is where one of the most fascinating pieces of the book comes into play. As the reader, you never really grasp the magic system, because Cordelia doesn't really grasp the magic system because her mom has a grasp on it. The ways in which magic is used to manipulate the people in this book and how it informs people's decisions is how we move forward, and I just found that so fascinating. Cordelia's mom is a sorceress, and after her patron, presumably the man she is sleeping with, finally decides that he is done with her, she needs to find something more secure. So she heads off to try and secure a marriage for herself, while also using that to potentially secure a marriage for her daughter. And that's how we come to meet Hester, living with her brother, who just wants to make sure that her brother maybe isn't getting duped by this lady who shows up at their house. I always find myself in the midst of a T. Kingfisher novel feeling so fulfilled, because she's able to drop these comedic moments among quite serious topics. Those are often my favorite fantasy books to read. I love when there's a little chuckle here, a little nudge there, and it's not all so serious and sinister. And I often find that her fantasy forward books are so well paced. Like this, it just plodded along so perfectly. I felt like I could leave it down. I really wanted to pick it back up again. And I was able to finish it in a couple of days and not feel like I had rushed through it or like I had put off reading it. It was so well done. I would absolutely read this again. And yeah, I plan on reading a lot of T. Kingfisher this year, apparently. And then we reached the last book that I read this month, Unladylike Rules for Attraction by Amita Murray. So we are back in a historical romance where we follow Anya, who is a court singer. She is employed by the queen, and she has patrons outside of the queen who hire her to perform for them. And one of her patrons has passed away, and she comes to the will reading not really understanding why she's there. Turns out her patron left her a not insignificant sum of money, and the family is not happy about it. And so entwined in this is Damien, who is a cousin to this family. He also happens to be the named trustee to Anya, and his role in all of this is that there is a catch on the inheritance. So Anya has to marry before she is 25 so that she can claim the inheritance, and Damien, as the trustee, has to agree to the marriage, and if she doesn't get married, then he gets the money. The best thing about this book is the tension between Anya and Damien. That's the thing that kept me reading this book. It also had really good bones. Like, that is a great premise for a historical romance. It just didn't really come to fruition in a way that I was like, ooh, yes, this was super satisfying, because the pacing was really all over the place. It is my least favorite form of storytelling, where the author uses just passages of thought to fill us in on information. And it's not action forward thought. It's like, ooh, I wonder if I made this decision. And that's just not interesting to me. I found myself skimming quite a bit of it to get to the root of the chapters and the story. And I did mention this in a getting ready video, but when I go into historical romances, I often find that authors that are able to use social structure to forward their books, those end up being the most entertaining ones. Tried to skirt around social structure so much. The backbone of this book is that the children of this dowager countess are in mourning. If mourning culture had really been utilized, it would have built so much tension into this book. And instead, it felt like Amita was really fighting with that structure to try and just move the story forward. And it ended up making me be like, okay, well, this is so outside the bounds of what is socially acceptable that, one, these people would have had far more issues than the ones that they created for themselves. So I feel pretty torn about this one because it was entertaining in a lot of ways, but really frustrating to read in more ways. And now I feel like I have talked for so long. This month felt like a really great way to kick off the year. I read some absolute bangers. I read some books that I probably won't think about again for a long time, if not the rest of my life. And that's okay. That's just how we roll around here. First off, I definitely want to know what books you read in January. What did you love? What didn't you love? Have you read any of these books that I talked about? Do you plan on reading any of these books after I've talked about them? Let's chat in the comments. And if you liked this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That is how I know that you enjoyed it and you're going to look forward to more of these in the future. And I hope to see you again in the future, so please be sure to hit that subscribe button. You could even ding that notification bell so that you never miss out on a video that I post. That's all for now. I will chat to you in the next one. Bye!